Forms on web pages are used for letting your guests submit information to you. The form could be for signing up for a contest, tipping a friend on a cool page, or perhaps just for sending in a question or a comment along with your name and email. In fact, with Tangora's form module, you could build a form based on any grouping of questions that you could come up with. You have total power over the configuration, and the configuration is all point and click. Forms can be an element in a complex chain of functionality, but in its most simple aspect, forms with Tangora's form module are very easy to set up and a straightforward approach to gathering data. In this video, we'll be creating a page for a contact form. The form itself has already been created centrally. That is to say, we've already created each question. So what we'll be doing now is taking the form into use by creating a form page and positioning these questions. The contact form we'll be using was created under the module's form area, and right now I'm in the interface where I'll have an overview of my submissions, though we can see that there are none so far. To create a page to allow visitors to submit their contact information, I'll go into my page tree and find a page that I actually created beforehand called Contact. Right-click and choose Properties. Here I'm brought to the same interface that I got when I created the page. Under the Change Page Type setting, we'll see that I could change the page type to Form. And this option appears because I've already defined one or more forms under the module's Forms area. Then I'll just hit OK, and now I'll notice that there's a point called Settings. On any given function page in Tangora, we'll find the settings for our functionality there where we've placed our primary section in our page layout. When I click on Settings, I get an interface where I need to choose which form I want to base this page on. You may have several to choose from. And then I'll hit OK. The interface I see now has changed. There are 4 tabs where the display of my form is configured. Under the General tab, I have among my choices Layout, Edit Layout. When I click on this, I get a new window where I define my layout. And I'm met with a layout wizard which will help me to make my layout. There are 3 steps. So first, I'll choose the relevant fields that I want here. If, for example, I didn't want to collect information on the visitor's company, I could skip them over. But I actually want them all, so I'll just hit Next. Then I'll choose the order by dragging and dropping. Now, actually the order happened to be just fine in this case, so I'll just return it to how it was and hit Next. Finally, I need to choose which layout I want to use. These layouts determine where the label will be positioned in relation to the fields. I'll choose Labels in front and then hit Exit, and as you can see, my layout is now created. I could, by the way, run the wizard again by choosing the Tangora button and Wizard. So at this point, I could actually save the layout, close the layout window, and if I view the page live now on my site, I'll see that I could submit some information. In fact, I'll do so now. And then we'll see that we get a thank you screen, which we'll configure in just a bit. Back in Tangora then, I could return to the Modules area under the specific form in the Form area. And then we can see the information displayed here that I've just sent in. And I can double-click to view all the information collected. So in just a few short steps and a very short span of time, we've created a complete functioning form page. We're now ready to add a little finesse. First off, I want to show you how to send visitor submissions as an email to your organization, to the form sender, or to you both. Here, back on my form page under Settings, I have a tab called Email. I activate the feature by writing a sender email in the field at the top here. This should ideally be a real email at your organization, though whether or not you use this email for further correspondence with your guests is your choice and can just be indicated in your communication. You can add a name by just adding the name in parentheses. So for example here, I'll just use info@frez.com and put Frez in parentheses like this. The next 2 fields are external recipient and internal recipient, which are your visitor and your organization respectively. In order for your visitor to receive an email, they need to submit a valid email, and the email field is defined centrally in the module area in the given form. Internal recipient is just handwritten, and you could add various addresses simply by adding a comma between the addresses. Field-dependent distribution is an advanced feature which allows emails to be sent to different internal recipients depending on the nature of your visitor's submission. We'll skip over this feature for now. Then we have the heading, that is to say the subject line of the email that is sent, and finally the contents of the email. Here, the system automatically generates a suggestion to your text which you can modify. And here you'll notice a bunch of words with curly braces around them, like name, email, and position. These are so-called merge fields, which are stand-ins that get replaced by the actual data which has been submitted by the sender. I could automatically conjure these merge fields by right-clicking and choosing Merge Fields, which would be relevant if I were rewriting the whole message from scratch, or perhaps I wanted to just repeat a name, for example. And now I'm done. There are a couple of other functional details that I want to adjust here. I want to give my visitors feedback in the event that they've made a mistake in their form submission, and introduce you to the concept of required fields. And then I want to show you how to modify on-screen messages to your visitors that they receive after they submitted a form. Back on my form page under Settings and the General tab, I have a point here for error text and one for after submission. Error text is to indicate that there's an error with your visitor's form submission. An error occurs when a field has not been filled in correctly, or that a field has been designated as required and has not been filled in. The process of checking for errors is often called form validation. Let me explain by returning to the front-end display of my form page. A classic example of a field that might not be filled in correctly is an email which doesn't comply with the rules for email syntax, and Tangora can automatically see if it does or not. So let's say I entered a name and then entered my last name in the email field by mistake and then tried to submit. Well, the system gives me an error message. If I correct this and hit send, then I still get the error message, and the reason for this is that there's some fields which I need to fill out in order to submit the form. Once I've filled in all of the required fields, I'll then get a thank you message. Back on our form page under Settings, I can configure my error message by clicking on Edit Section next to the error text option. And here I have an interface where I can modify or add sections, which you'll be familiar with from page editing and page layouts. In order to modify the existing system default message, then, I'll just hit the pencil icon and then modify the text. Maybe I wanted it bold and red. Then I'll hit OK at the bottom, and then I can simply close the window. To change the thank you text that your visitor gets after submission, we'll repeat the same process. A little tip here is that you'll often want to have the same or a similar message to the email which you've configured. So we might just copy and paste that content. Okay, so now we're actually done with our basic configuration. But allow me just to round out our discussion and mention a few more options and quickly give you a little context about the centrally defined form in relation to form pages before later on we'll look into the topic of designing our form. Okay, just quickly here, the Security tab refers to what kind of data can be sent, specifically if HTML or scripts can be submitted. Just leave it at the default unless you know that you have particular needs one way or the other. The Fields tab allows you to change the attributes of a selected field. So if I wanted to change the heading of a given field, I could choose to do it here. I could also change if a field was optional or not. So let's say that we wanted to change notes to be optional. I'll just remove the asterisk, which I've opted to use to indicate a required field, and then remove the check mark from mandatory, and the deed is done. I could actually access the same on-page settings through my layout if I prefer. If I open my layout and then click on the Notes field, which we've just adjusted, then we'll see that we can access the same interface by clicking on the Fields button. This is the same setting, so if I change it here again, it would be reflected in the Fields tab setting, though not in the central settings of the form's definition under the Forms module. Now this interface we've gotten when we adjust it is actually the same interface as when you define fields centrally in the Forms module. We can access the form, by the way, under the General tab under the Forms setting. So that'll bring us back to our Central Submissions overview. Here I also have a point called Design, where I can centrally define the same settings that I've just shown you as we've adjusted locally on the page. So now that we're finished with our discussion of the form page configuration, let's modify the layout of our form slightly. In our discussion of form layouts, I'm going to introduce you to Visual Designer Templates, which controls the way that your field headers behave in relation to your fields. The form we've created using the wizard is quite nice, really, but there are a few details here that I want to sort out. First off, I'd prefer to have the Send button to be in the lower right-hand corner. And then I have a little problem here, and that is that the Areas of Interest header is on 2 lines, and I'd actually prefer to have it on 1. So to modify our layout here under the General tab of our form page settings, I'll hit Edit Layout by Layout, and then we access our layout. And here I can do any number of operations with Visual Designer, so I can reorder my fields, add margins and paddings and whatnot. So for that Send button, I could just take hold of it and give it a margin left. If I wanted absolute pixel perfection, I could do a bit more research as to exactly how many pixels this should be. But as you can see here, I could just adjust the number of pixels visually using the Apply button. And that will bring me to the same place. So now I have that Area of Interest headline, which I want to get on 1 line. To tackle this problem, I'll need to change the Visual Designer template being used. I'll click off to the gray background, and then I'll click in the area of my form, and you'll see that there's a blue box that appears here. This is a Visual Designer template, which was automatically created when I ran the wizard. Under the Context-Sensitive Template tab that appears then, I can make my adjustments. Here we have a list of different configurations in our library, which you'll recognize from step 3 in our wizard. And if I wanted to modify one of these, I'd just need to choose Create New, create copy of the selected template, or we could do it from scratch if we'd prefer. What I'm presented with then is our Template Designer. Here under the first tab, I could give it a name, and then I could choose whether to keep it local, so it can only be used on this page, or global. If I choose global, then I could also choose to make it accessible in my wizard as one among the choices in our global library. Then I have 5 more tabs. I won't go into details here, but I will mention that Panel relates to the entire area of our template. Box relates to each field, both the header and the field itself. Heading relates to the field headers. And here's where I'll actually change the width from 10 ems to maybe 15. And you can see that solves our problem. Content refers to what's in the fields. Finally, Advanced gives us some typographies, so-called CSS, where we can modify if we have some advanced needs. We've just gone through a basic form page setup, and we've seen that you have complete control and that it's super easy to use. To master the topic of forms, you'll also need to learn how to create a central form that could be used to create form pages. And you'll also do well to learn about how the Forms module works together with other Tangora modules, such as, for example, the external users or database modules, and indeed with Tangora's application constructor, where forms are an important building block for creating more advanced setups. There are also several modules that have their own built-in forms, so it will also be important to know, for example, that you use the newsletter built-in forms to make newsletter sign-up pages. But as you learn about each module, you'll be tipped off as to whether there are built-in forms or not. Thank you for watching.